Hello and welcome to the next video in our How to Paint Space Marine series. Today we'll be tackling a Dark Angels Intercessor Sergeant. This model includes a pauldron from the Dark Angels upgrade sprue along with an extra purity seal on its leg. We will be working from a black base coat where we have then applied an even layer of Caliban Green. It's probably easier for you to just pick up a rattle can of Caliban Green from Citadel or Renegade Green from Colorforge and go for there if you're doing an army. In this video, we will take this humble marine and go through the steps to take it from this dark and humble origin to something a little bit more impressive using some edge highlighting, some fine brush control, and really make him shine. I've always personally preferred a more clean look to my marines rather than a heavy, battle damaged or distressed, grim, dark aesthetic. So to begin, we will block in the base colours. I'm going to pick out in particular the skin, the leather of the belt and straps, the undersuit, the red and the silvers on the guns, and first up is going to be a base coat of Bugmans Glow for the skin. I'm using a wet palette here, so this helps to keep my paints usable for longer, but also slightly thins the paints in the process, making them easier to apply, whilst also not obscuring the detail in the process. I'll finish adding this on, and then we'll be right back. Next up, we're going to use some Eshin Grey. This is to pick out the undersuit. Prominent areas are usually around the butt, the joints of the arms, elbows, and the back of the knees. You can sometimes find some at the neck, but usually this is obscured by the head. And I'm going to add this to my wet palette and start blocking that in. We're going to be working from the harder to reach areas first, so the next up is the metallics, and we're going to be using Leadbelcher here to hit up the weapons, some trim on the helmets, and the nodes on the backpack. On the gun in particular, don't stress too much about being too neat here, as the rest of the gun is yet to be painted. However, when you get close to the armor paneling, try to be careful, but if you do make any mistakes, go back in with the Caliban Green to fix it. We're then going to start working on that vibrant red on the weapon casings. As the Dark Angels are predominantly green in colour, this is an opportunity to add a bit more distinction and vibrancy to our models. I will carefully apply this to our weapon casings, trying to avoid the silver where possible and neaten up where appropriate. We'll also use this for the eye lenses on the helmet. Just be very careful, as this is a tiny area to work in, and switch to a smaller brush if needed. I did. You could also paint the wax on the purity seals with this red. I personally prefer to do more of an older, aged wax look. Next up, we're going to use some Rhinox Hide for the belt and the straps. If you have any pouches or holsters on your mini, you could certainly pick them out with this too. We also have used this to base in all the areas we want to be bone, such as the wings and the skull on the chest, and then the areas that we will be painting parchment, namely the scrolls on the weapon and shoulder pad, as well as the purity seal. Then using Zandri Dust, we will then quickly go over the parchment areas. The brown gives this a much nicer foundation than the green here, ensuring we get a rich, creamy colour. If you're using transfers over a plain shoulder pad, you can ignore this bit, but as we have the Dark Angels patterned one, we will use some Ulthuan Grey to start picking out the sword and wing pattern. Ulthuan Grey is a lovely colour, but honestly it's a bit of a pain to work with, and will require at least 2 to 3 coats to get a nice consistent finish, especially when using it over a darker colour. The wings and skull on the chest, we will be based using some bone white from Vallejo. This is probably one of my favourite colours and goes on so smoothly over that dark brown. Barak-Nar Burgandy is then used to pick out the wax seal. You could also potentially use this for any decorative ropes or tassely bits that you often find either on shoulder pads or holding capes, that kind of thing. Off camera, I've then applied a gloss finish over all the model for the next steps. If you're following along, this is officially entering the ugly stage of the painting process, and using a gloss varnish is not 100% necessary. However, I do like to use this to create a better surface to apply transfers and then an enamel panel liner to further down the line. If you have never used a panel liner before, this one from Tamiya comes in with a handy applicator. Make sure you give it a good shake before using it and then gently apply it to the areas you want to be darker. The gloss varnish allows the liquid here to run into all the recesses and does the majority of the heavy lifting for you. You can be as messy as you like with this, we'll clean it up a bit later on. You could alternatively use an oil wash here for similar results, or if you really want to, you could paint in all of your recesses using Nuln Oil, maybe Black Templar Contrast, or even thinned down Abaddon Black. I just prefer this method as it's quick, easy, and incredibly effective. Whilst we have the mini varnished, we're going to apply some transfers here, and looking at the Dark Angels transfer sheet that came with the combat patrol, we're going to be starting off using this tactical squad marking and the number 2 to match the rest of our squad. I'll cut them out and I'll be right back. Okay, now they're cut out, and before we go any further, I'm going to talk a bit about transfers. By their very nature, they're designed to work with just water. Soak them and then apply them to the area. Job done. Personally, I prefer to utilize the gloss varnish that I've put down and then utilize some decal softener. I personally use this one from Green Stuff World. I have also tried this one from AK Interactive, though I didn't get on so well with it. If you're airbrush adverse or if you just don't have access to one, you can get Decal Fix, which is this one in particular is from Vallejo. Essentially, it's a thin varnish you can apply by brush that cleans and prepares the area the transfer is to be applied to for better surface adhesion. I personally haven't tried them, but Microsol and Microset are also supposed to be a good alternative. Now, to apply these, you'll need some water, obviously a surface to apply your transfer to, and I like to use some tweezers. you essentially soak the transfer completely in the water, and then using a wet brush, just begin to gently agitate the surface of the transfer till it begins to move. On average, this takes about 20 seconds to do, and as soon as it begins to move, that's when you know you're good to bring your mini in and just slide the transfer onto the area you want to adhere to. There's still plenty of play for you to manipulate once it's on the surface. Make sure when you do this though, you're using gentle pressure to encourage it to move as opposed to aggressive strokes which might rip the transfer. Once you have got it where you want it, you can use a cotton bud or a Q-tip to gently remove any excess water that has been left on the surface. This process can sometimes leave small wrinkles where the transfer struggles with curved surfaces, especially pauldrons, although you could leave it here and it will adhere to the surface just fine. Personally, I like to take some Decal softener with the cotton bud, gently apply it with some soft pressing motion to press down those edges. The Decal softener essentially breaks down the transparent parts of the transfer, leaving just the coloured pieces in place. A fun thing you can do with transfers is layer them, as you can see here in this example. So I'm just going to repeat the process we've just been through, and I've given the transfer about 5 minutes to settle. We're going to apply the number to our shoulder pad just to match the rest of our squad. Okay, we've just finished applying that second transfer over the top, and truthfully it's still a bit wet. However, hopefully this helps you out when looking to add some easy detail to your minis. I now need to go over the whole model with a matte varnish to seal them in and take off the glossy shine. With that matte varnish applied, you can now see the recess shade a lot clearer, and the transfer looks like it's part of the shoulder pad properly. We can now take a mix 50-50 of Caliban Green and Warpstone Glow and begin the lengthy process of edge highlighting. These hard edges are just a case of angling your brush and following along with the edge of the surface you're looking to paint, keeping in mind that initially you want to be painting a line about twice the width of the thinnest that you're able to paint. Then, these other surfaces where you don't have access to an edge, you just want to brace your hands, use a smaller brush, be patient, and then do your best to hide the area you're painting with another part of the model so that no one can actually see what you're doing. Continuing with the green, we then take just pure Warpstone Glow, go over the same edges, this time trying to paint a line about half the width of the previous area. The final green highlight is Moot Green, and we're going to use this to pick out some of the more prominent areas that we want to emphasize or that are more exposed. This is really a time-consuming process, but I'm sure you will agree that once it's done, the green armor is looking great. As always, it's important to have your paint slightly thinned to make for a smoother application. We can then use some Skeleton Horde contrast paint to essentially tint the wings and skull on the chest, darkening it down a touch. Going back in now with our bone white, just to pick out the more prominent features such as the structure of the wings, the tips of the feathers on the wings, and ensuring to leave some of that darker contrast colour we've just applied showing in the deeper areas. I've stopped halfway through this to try and demonstrate the subtle difference, camera willing, between the side on the left where I've just applied the bone white and the side on the right, which is just the contrast. You could be happy with what's on the right. I prefer a little bit more definition. Okay, going back to that shoulder pad, we're going to go in with some Ulthuan Grey to touch it up where appropriate. If you didn't get enough of a shadow or definition when you were using your choice of shade earlier on, i.e. the panel liner, oil wash, non-oil, whichever one you ended up doing, and you just want to add some definition here, I definitely recommend using maybe some Gryph-Charger Grey contrast or perhaps some Apothecary White, and then going over it with the Ulthuan Grey just to pick out the details like we've done here. And after checking the reference material, we realized that some of the bits of the gun were black, namely the grips on the underside as well as the magazine casing itself. So I'm going to have to address that. I'm also about to paint the markings on the knee that's been conveniently left blank up until now. Just taking a quick look at the transfer sheet, you can see that down here under the vehicle markings there is a chapter marking area. So these basically represent the vehicles that would be tied to the respective squads, but we can use this as a reference for what we're going to be painting on the knee. For example, here's the Gravis Captain I'm currently working on, and this is the process we're going to replicate. Start off by taking some black. I'm using black from Vallejo Game Color as it has a really nice matte finish to it. Essentially what you're looking to do is paint in 3/4 of this knee pad, keeping in mind that 2 of these quarters are going to be painted bone over the top of this. However, we can use this black area to essentially outline some of this bone area by painting it slightly further than halfway over the green area. Here I'm using the point where the leg panel starts as the midpoint for my pattern and using it as a guide essentially to draw the horizontal line from one side to the other, which essentially gives me my segments or my quarters. It might take a bit of work to get this right, but keep going till you have a line that you're happy with. You can always go back over it with the green if you need to, and as we've not really done any highlights on this particular knee pad, obviously touch up other areas where appropriate. Before we move to the next step, I really quickly want to take some Agrax Earthshade and go over the Purity Seal parchment, so I'll just very quickly do that now. Whilst that's drying, we're going to take on some Zandri Dust and begin to define the two bone-coloured segments of the knee. Really take your time here and paint as close to the edge of the green segment as you dare, while still allowing a sliver of black to separate the segments. As you can see, I've painted the other quarter in exactly the same way. I'm then taking the bone white, which I still have some on my palette, and using this to edge highlight the upper corner of each of the bone segments. I did take the liberty of following our earlier armor edge highlighting to paint in the green segment of the knee, and here's what it looks like now. Okay, using a 50-50 mix of Dryad Bark and Zandri Dust, I'm going to go in and edge highlight all of the leather. So in my case, this just applies to the belt and the straps, but if you have any pouches, holsters, things like that, it would apply to that on your own model. Then using a mix of Zandri Dust and Bone White, I'm going to go in and pick out all of the areas of the parchment. Essentially, I'm just looking to define the edges of this and highlight the folds, trying to kind of give it a bit of a worn, tattered look. Next up, we're going to take some Mephiston Red, and then we are going to go all over the red paneling on the weapons, leaving the darker Khorne red in the recessed areas. We're also going to use this on the eye lenses and pick out some of the buttons on his little control panel on his arm. This color is a bit of a jump up and it will really help to make these pop. So you can see here we've actually gone back through and tidied up a bunch of things on the model. Namely, we've added some Leadbelcher dots to all of the rivets and cleaned up any mistakes that we'd made along the way. I also decided to drill out my gun barrels. Previously, I was very much of the opinion that if it didn't come modeled with gun barrels, I didn't need to do it. But for some reason, I decided to do it on my combat patrol, and I really liked how it looked. So I've done it on this guy as well. Now, using some Squigg Orange, we can highlight all of the red areas, taking care to pick out the weapon trim, and also to make a small highlight within the eye lenses as well. We're going to very quickly highlight the metallics now, just using Stormhost Silver. This is a really good way to add some quick detail here without distracting from some of the other focal points of the model itself. Now using some Eshin Grey, we can pick out all of the black areas, such as the weapon casing and the undersuit, using a quick edge highlight. You could potentially take this a step higher if you wanted to and apply a lighter grey over the top of this, but to be honest, I'm quite happy with just this initial edge highlight. We're just going to go in and pick out the 2 tiny bits of gold that we missed before using some Retributor Armour. I'm just going to very quickly highlight those now with a mix of Retributor Armour and some Stormhost Silver. I'm not going to waste too much time on these. They're very small details. Now for something that I really hate doing, never mind on camera, and that is to paint some eyes. Fingers crossed we do not end up too cross-eyed ourselves. Firstly, I want to take some Ulthuan Grey and paint in the whites of the eyeballs. Personally, I prefer an off-white for the very rare occasion that I don't paint a helmeted mini. The technique for this, as far as I understand it, is to simply take a minute amount of paint on the smallest brush you can and threaten the mini with it until you get it just about right, or at least good enough. Next step is to take some black Templar contrast paint and try to do the pupils of the eye. Now, I promise you, I am aiming for the upper middle of the eyeball here. Yeah, that'll do. Now I'm going to finish up the skin by using some Reikland Fleshshade to deepen some of the darker areas, pick out his brow wrinkles, that kind of thing. Okay, so we went back in with Bugmans Glow and tidied things up again after applying that flesh wash, and hopefully you can see that we've essentially used the wash to outline the features and can now go in with our highlight color, which is a mix of Bugmans Glow and Cadian Fleshtone, to start picking out the finer details. Okay, one last thing to cover is the text on the parchment, and if you're brave enough, the text on the other bits of scroll work as well. And there you have it, a clean looking Dark Angels Intercessor Sergeant. Make sure to base your model to fit the rest of your army. If you have enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe, and do drop a comment below if you found something useful in the video. I have more of these planned for the other founding chapters, as well as a couple of others, so do let me know which one you would like to see next in the comments. Take it easy, I'll catch you on the next one.